So good evening dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 14th January 2025 and today we have some important articles for the discussion, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles along with one mains practice question. So this is very important exercise, particularly with respect to mains practice question. So by this particular exercise you could understand how to address the demand of the question, the presentation and the structuring of the answer, how to write introduction and conclusion of the answers. So everything you could understand in a very detailed manner. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion. And today we have one very important question with respect to Forest Rights Implementation, Forest Rights Act of 2006 and the challenges in the implementation of that particular legislation. And in fact this legislation is very important when it comes to the tribal rights or rights of people who are living in forests. So therefore the question here is examine the challenges in the implementation of the Forest Rights Act 2006 and its implications for tribal welfare. So that is the question which is asked here, because it is actually based on one current affairs news article, that is Center ask states to create mechanism for compliance with the Forest Rights Act. So there should be a comprehensive mechanism, so that mechanism will ensure the compliance with the Forest Rights Act 2006. And in fact this act has been passed to ensure that the rights of the forest dwellers would be adequately secured. So that is the overall objective of this Forest Rights Act, right? So the question says that we need to mention some challenges in the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. So we need to look into the challenges along with the implications for the tribal welfare as well. And since we are writing the challenges, it is also very important that you should also write a way forward as well for this answer, so that how we can overcome those challenges. Now in the introduction you could just introduce the Forest Rights Act of 2006. Now so we can say that this Forest Rights Act, a legislation that was framed in the year 2006, and in fact this legislation is considered as a revolutionary piece of legislation, because the aim and objective of the Forest Rights Act 2006 is to correct the historical injustice that has been suffered by the forest dwellers, particularly the scheduled tribes or particularly vulnerable scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers, or they're also called as forest dwelling communities. Like this legislation recognizes the rights of the forest dwelling communities, whether it is STs or particularly vulnerable scheduled tribes or any other forest dwelling communities. And in fact it also provides rights to these communities over the resources, particularly the minor forest produce. However, the problem with the Forest Rights Act 2006 is that while implementation of this particular piece of legislation still a challenge in the sense that all states have not properly implemented this legislation, and that is where the forest dwelling communities are not able to enjoy their rights properly. So this is a challenge, because it would lead to, if you're not implementing this legislation, so it would lead to alienation of the forest dwelling communities from their respective rights. So keeping this in mind, it is important to implement the Forest Rights Act of 2006. Now in this context, the question clearly asked us to write the challenges in the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. So let's try to identify those challenges as well as part of the answer. Now when we talk about the first most important challenge in the implementation of the Forest Rights Act is that so it actually has a complex procedures, and even there's a lack of capacity in the local authorities when it comes to the implementation of this legislation. And the lack of capacity of local authorities along with the complex procedures further delaying the process of recognition of the claims of tribal communities or the forest dwellers. In fact, Ministry of Tribal Affairs in the year 2023 has published a data, and according to that particular data, so around 50% of claims have been rejected due to technical errors. So claims about the forest rights have been rejected. So 50% is a very high proportion. You can imagine that 50% of the claims of traditional forest dwellers about their forest rights over the land, rights over the resources has been rejected. So secondly, there's a lack of awareness among the stakeholders who are being identified under the Forest Rights Act of 2006. So this will be another major challenge, right? So in fact, there are many forest dwelling communities, and in fact this legislation has been passed to ensure that those forest dwelling communities get benefited from this legislation, but most of them are not aware about this piece of legislation, what are the rights which are being extended to them, and that is one of the major problem in the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. Because as we have already discussed, that the local bodies lack the adequate capacity when it comes to enhancing awareness among the people about this Forest Rights Act. So in 2019, Comptroller and Auditor General of India report has actually found that so around 70% of the tribal households who are living in Odisha are unaware about this Forest Rights Act 2006. So therefore you could imagine that most of the people who are actually the forest dwelling communities, they lack awareness about this Forest Rights Act. And there are a very limited effort on the part of the administration to enhance awareness among the people who are actual beneficiaries of this particular legislation. And apart from that, the local self-governance institutions also have a limited capacity. So they lack the capacity to take up a sustained information, education and knowledge dissemination campaign among the tribals. And apart from that, there's also an overlapping authority among different departments and different agencies, and that is also problematic. So generally, convergence of schemes, convergence of the existing resources would be efficient, right? So that would be welcomed, but overlapping of authority is a problematic, because there's an overlapping authority between the forest department, local governance bodies, and that would create the implementation delays. So that is a very, very problematic. For example, Madhya Pradesh has approved claims which are contested by the forest department and leading to the unresolved disputes, because here it involves Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and here it also involves the state governments and also the local panchayats, and apart from that the forest departments also being involved. So therefore there is an overlapping authority from different ministries, departments and agencies, and that has become more and more problematic here. And in fact, so many tribal families are also being evicted from their tribal land, right? So despite their claims of being the forest dwellers either valid or when still it is pending, it is not yet decided that whether they are the original inhabitants of that particular area or not is not yet decided. It is still pending, but still then those forest dwelling communities are being evicted. So that amounts to violation of the due process as well. And in fact, the Supreme Court in the year 2019 temporarily stayed the eviction of 11 lakh claimants, citing the procedural lapses that are being existed here. Now, when the forest dwellers are being evicted arbitrarily, so that to some extent would also contribute to the left-wing extremism problem, right? So left-wing extremism actually have their foundations on the disaffection of the tribals, right? So because disaffection of tribals would lead to the continuous support of tribal people to the left-wing extremist movement. So that's where it would also become an internal security issue as well. So apart from that, so environmentalists are also very often claim that the Forest Rights Act is also threatening the biodiversity as well. So that is another major challenge when it comes to implementation of the Forest Rights Act, because these environmentalists are also citing some examples that how this Forest Rights Act would threaten the existing biodiversity and would threaten this pristine ecosystem. Because they have cited an example that in Ranthambore, Rajasthan Tiger Reserve, so that is an example of the conflict between the human beings and also animals, and that leads to human wildlife conflict, and that even leads to the a degradation of biodiversity, as it will lead to the killing of animals. And a poor prioritization and insufficient allocation of resources is also another major challenge that the Forest Rights Act has been facing, right? For the successful implementation of any scheme, any program or policy, adequate resources have to be allocated. So if you don't allocate adequate amount of resources, so those programs cannot be implemented in letter and spirit in a full scale, right? So therefore there is a need for a prioritization of the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. So convergence between different departments and agencies is good, but the convergence should be a healthy convergence. So that should ultimately benefit the forest dwelling communities along with protection of the environment. So this should be the ultimate priority. And apart from that, there is also a need for sufficient allocation of resources for the successful implementation of the Forest Rights Act. And in fact, Niti Aayog in 2021 has reported that the underutilization of existing Forest Rights Act funds limiting outreach and capacity building efforts, right? So whatever funds which are being available under the Forest Rights Act implementation, those funds are still not properly utilized, and that has been impacting the efforts of capacity building and at the same time the outreach as well. However, there are certain implications for the tribal welfare as well when you implement this Forest Rights Act in such a poor scale. So there are some implications as well for the tribal welfare, so we'll try to understand those implications as well, right? So one such implication which is very important is that delayed or rejected claims. For example, it is important that you make a claim that I'm a traditional forest dweller here. So if that claim is identified and recognized by the relevant authority, so you would be recognized as a traditional forest dweller, right? So there will be no illegal or arbitrary evictions once you are being recognized as a traditional forest dweller. But here what has been happening, so those claims are being either delayed or rejected, and that is one major problem, and it has been depriving tribals of their forest resources. Tribals are not able to properly enjoy the forest resources, and it has also been impacting their traditional livelihoods as well, because tribals very often are dependent on the minor forest produce, right? So their livelihoods are mostly dependent on the minor forest produce. Now if you don't recognize them as a traditional forest dwellers, so it has been impacting their traditional livelihoods along with their right to collect the forest resources as well. For example, in Chhattisgarh, displacement due to mining projects, because those areas where tribals live are also mineral rich resource regions. So in Chhattisgarh, due to mining projects, so that has led to loss of livelihoods despite pending claims. And in fact, states are very often failed to provide an alternative employment opportunities. So these are some major challenges that the tribals have been facing, right? So apart from that, denial of claims, so that also perpetuates the socio-economic inequalities as well, right? Socio-economic inequalities is also another major problem. particularly with respect to the forest dwellers. So forest dwellers, the higher level of poverty and problems like anemia, child stunting, wasting, lack of education, lack of healthcare facilities, all these problems have been further perpetuating the socio-economic backwardness and inequalities as well among the tribal communities. So as it has been highlighted by the United Nations Development Program in the year 2022, so it has been observed that higher malnutrition rates among displaced tribals in forest rights affected areas, and apart from that, it would further leads to the weakening of the grassroots democracy. So that has been brought into effect through 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. So thereby bypassing Gram Sabhas, that particularly undermines the participatory governance as well as the community decision making. Now the key objectives of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act is that, so it ensures participatory governance. So along with ensuring participatory governance, it also ensures the community decision making as well, right? So it also ensures community decision making, right? So however, Gram Sabhas are being sidelined or they are being undermined. So that is also another major problem. In fact, so Kasturi Rangan Committee, so that has noted frequent sidelining of Gram Sabhas in project clearances. So that is also another major problem, and displacement and non-recognition of rights is also another major problem, right? So that aspect has been disrupting the socio-cultural fabric of the tribal communities. And in fact, one example of how this has been disrupting the socio-cultural fabric of the tribal communities, that Dongaria Khond, a tribal community, so which is living in Odisha, Chhattisgarh, in those areas. So they started a protest against Vedanta mining in Niyamgiri Hills, exemplifies the cultural loss concerns, right? So in this context, it is very important that the Forest Rights Act has to be implemented in a letter and spirit. Particularly, the center has already advised the state governments to establish a proper mechanism at the state level, so that this mechanism will ensure fair implementation of the Forest Rights Act, so that the traditional forest dwellers' rights can be recognized and adequately recognized, and illegal evictions, arbitrary evictions of tribals could be prevented. And there should be a balance between protecting the rights of the tribal communities along with the conservation of nature as well as the biodiversity. So that's how it could be ensured, and that's how you could actually write the conclusion in the answer. So today we have some important articles also, so we'll try to discuss those articles as well. So one such article is about fertilizer, particularly urea. So in fact, when it comes to Indian agriculture sector, so if we wanted to get a better produce, a better productivity, fair incomes for the farmers, and ensuring food security for country's population, it is very important that we need to use a lot of fertilizer. So that is true, because in fact, Indian soils, we have been intensively using the fertilizer right from our independence. So because of I could say that right after the Green Revolution, we have been using the fertilizer. So agriculture has also become fertilizer intensive arena. So therefore, in this context, it is very important that we have to use the fertilizer, right? So to get a better produce, a better productivity, to increase farmers' incomes, as we already knew that the government has the goal of doubling farmers' income. So in order to double the farmers' income also, we need to use the fertilizer, but the most dominant fertilizer in India is urea, right? So in fact, urea is also one of the highly subsidized fertilizer in India. So government subsidizes the fertilizer so that farmers could get the fertilizer at the affordable prices, right? So if the government don't subsidize urea for then it would be very difficult for the farmers to purchase this fertilizer from the market and use it in their field, right? So it would be highly unaffordable for the farmers, and it would also substantially increase the input cost as well. So therefore, in this context, so we'll try to discuss about urea industry in India. So how much urea we have been producing, how much urea we have been importing from other countries. So we just try to discuss that. So amid challenges in the fertilizer sector, right? So there are certain challenges in the fertilizer sector, so we'll discuss about those challenges as well. So despite those challenges, fertilizer sector has been performing better, such as challenges such as shortages of DAP, diammonium phosphate, and limited investment in manufacturing. So India's urea industry has achieved significant progress, right? So it has actually achieved significant progress, India's urea industry, so despite having these problems. However, domestic production has risen considerably. I mean, the domestic production of urea has substantially increased. So that has been reflecting efforts towards the central government's goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is a self-reliant India, right? Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? So Atmanirbhar Bharat is a self-reliant India. So this essentially means that we don't dependent on other countries, right? So we produce whatever we use, we manufacture ourselves, because during COVID-19 pandemic, what happened? The entire supply chains across the globe, so I would say global supply chains got disrupted during COVID-19 pandemic. So in order to prevent such global supply chain disruption in future, in order to avoid India dependent on one single country for essential supplies, so it is very important that we have the capacity to produce fertilizer in India itself, right? So that is the objective. And in fact, so India is focusing on fertilizers, focusing on producing fertilizers in India itself. So that is the aim of Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. So the economic survey 23 and 24 also pointed out that, or it also states that Indian agriculture sector actually provides livelihood to about 42.3% of India's population, right? So you just have to remember this, because this is new data that has been released by the economic survey 23-24, right? So it has been providing livelihood opportunities for 42.3% of the India's population. And in fact, so Indian agriculture has also been contributing to overall 80.2% of country's GDP as well in current prices, right? So this is with respect to some data about Indian agriculture. Now, one thing that you need to understand, that in terms of GDP, Indian agriculture is not that significant contributor to the GDP, but in terms of providing livelihood, so about just less than 50% of India's population still dependent on the agriculture sector, and that is the fact that we should remember here. And in fact, so when we talk about the inputs that we use in agriculture sector, fertilizer, water, and seed are considered as vital inputs, right? So they're being considered as vital inputs for achieving higher agricultural production in the country. And in fact, the government has also undertaken various efforts. So various efforts during the last decade, due to which the total fertilizer production has substantially increased from about 385.39 million metric tons to 503.35 metric tons. So there is a substantial increase in the production of the fertilizer in India, and that would make India are a self-reliant in terms of the fertilizer production, and we could also reduce our dependence on other countries, and we could also import as many fertilizer as possible from other countries as well. And in fact, several measures were undertaken by the government to increase total fertilizer production in the country. So what are those measures that the government has already undertaken? So when we talk about those measures, urea subsidy scheme that the government has launched, new urea policy 2015, nutrient based subsidy scheme, right? So these are some policies that the government has launched. And in fact, so the government has also been promoting sustainable methods such as use of alternative fertilizers in the sense that the government has been promoting nano urea, and it has also been promoting nano DAP and even the organic fertilizer as well, right? Organic fertilizer as well. So this ensures the efficient usage of the existing fertilizer, and that would also prevent leakage and diversion of the fertilizers, right? So now we'll try to understand some basic details with respect to urea fertilizer. So what exactly is this urea fertilizer? So urea fertilizer is a nitrogen rich fertilizer, right? Because it consists of 46% of nitrogen, right? And it is being used for a promotion of crop growth and as well as crop development, and that's why it is being considered as most important fertilizer in India. And it is also a low cost fertilizer because it's high in nitrogen content, and that makes transportation and storage less expensive. And urea is being absorbed by plants directly or converted to ammonia and carbon dioxide by the soil microorganisms. And in fact, it can also be used as a cattle feed supplement and has an industrial application such as in the production of plastics as well. So since it has an industrial applications, before the neem coated urea was being introduced, so urea was being diverted to the industrial purposes, right? So urea was purchased at a subsidized price, and then it will be diverted to the industries. Now because of the neem coated urea, industries cannot use the neem coated urea. So that's how the leakage and diversion of the urea fertilizer can also be arrested. So however, the government has been planning to establish new urea plants so that the urea production could be substantially increased and we could reduce our dependence on other countries. So 6 new urea plants have contributed significantly to increased production, right? They have significantly contributed to the increased production with a combined output of 7.55 metric ton in 23-24, right? So they have the capacity of 7.55 metric ton in this year, with investment which are ranging from around 6,000 crore to around 8,000 crore per each plant. And in fact, these plants would specifically cater to the new green revolution or second green revolution areas. Now what are those second green revolution areas? In fact, the eastern part of India is being selected for the second green revolution, right? So that is more sustainable compared to the first green revolution, right? So like eastern UP, West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand and Telangana, so thereby providing a 20% of the market share in eastern India. And older units such as National Fertilizer Limited NFL, Bhatinda and Nangal and Panipat is caters to the farmers in Punjab and Haryana regions. And apart from that, regional production strategy. So when we talk about the regional production strategy of the fertilizer, so the focus would be on increasing production in northern and eastern part of India. The production will be substantially increased in northern and eastern part of India, while we need to optimize the imports in the peninsular part of India. And in fact, so there are also plans to shut down the older and inefficient plants to achieve energy efficiency, right? So to enhance energy efficiency, it is very important that high energy intensive industries, particularly those industries which uses fossil fuels, so those industries must be closed down. And apart from that, the rational pricing is also another aspect. So rational pricing is crucial for balanced fertilizer use and also reducing dependency on both production and imports as well, right? So this is some data and other important aspects with respect to the fertilizer industry in India. However, we could say that the government has been making efforts to establish new fertilizer production plants so that we could achieve the goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat when it comes to the fertilizer production. And for our agriculture also, adequate amount of fertilizer can be available, and we could also explore the opportunities to explore our export our fertilizer to other countries as well. So such opportunities can be found. So next is all-weather Sonamarg tunnel that has been recently inaugurated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So we'll just try to discuss about this all-weather tunnel and some more details and how it is strategically important as well. Recently, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated a 6.5 kilometer Jedmore tunnel in Jammu and Kashmir's Gandarbal district. And in fact, about this Jedmore tunnel, we have already discussed in our previous lecture. And in fact, it has been built at a cost of rupees 2,400 crore on a highway called Srinagar-Leh National Highway. Right, so it is being built on the Srinagar and Leh National Highway. And in fact, this particular tunnel that has been built on Srinagar-Leh National Highway, right, so this ensures seamless all-weather connectivity between Gagangir. Right, so it ensures seamless all-weather connectivity between Gagangir and also Sonamarg. So thereby facilitating summer travel to Ladakh and also improving the regional accessibility as well. And in fact, this project is being overseen by the National Highways and Infrastructure Development Corporation Limited, right? So this particular agency would be looking over the project implementation, and it was began in 2015 and it was completed by 2024. And in fact, it is being hailed as an engineering marvel and also a game changer for the overall region. Now, why tunnels are being built in these areas? Now, one reason is the difficult terrain in these areas. Along with a difficult terrain, the weather conditions don't allow seamless all-weather 24/7 connectivity, which could connect different regions in this difficult terrain. So when we, for example, if there is an avalanche, if there is a landslide because of rough weather conditions, generally these areas would be blocked. So access to these areas would be blocked. So if we build tunnels in these difficult areas, so 24/7 accessibility, transportation can be ensured. And in fact, it is also very important for the movement of security forces as well, right? Because both Pakistan occupied Kashmir and apart from that, this India-China border, particularly line of actual control and line of control are also very close. So therefore, these areas should always be accessible for the security forces. So that is another important aspect. And apart from that, it could also substantially reduce the airborne movement or air movement of the security forces as well. Right, so we'll understand what is the significance of Jedmore tunnel, right? So we'll understand the strategic importance or strategic significance of this particular tunnel, right? So you can see here, this is the Jedmore tunnel, right? So it reduces the distance, it also reduces the time taken to travel from one point to another point, and it also ensures 24/7 all-weather connectivity to different regions which are otherwise impacted by the natural disasters. So the strategic importance of this tunnel, that Jedmore tunnel, so as we knew that it is located at an altitude of 8,650 feet, right? So it is located at a height of 8,650 feet, and it also plays a crucial role in India's defense needs by ensuring all-weather connectivity to the strategically vital Ladakh region, right? So it ensures all-weather connectivity to strategically vital, strategically important Ladakh region. And also it strengthens the link between Union Territory of Ladakh and the rest of the country as well, thereby bypassing landslide and avalanche prone areas. So as I have already discussed that these areas are landslide and avalanche prone areas, so therefore it is very important to ensure all weather connectivity or 24/7 connectivity. So this link would ensure all weather connectivity bypassing these natural forces or natural disasters such as landslide and avalanche. And in fact, the tunnel along with the under constructed Jojila tunnel, so Jojila is another tunnel which is being under connected, so it is under the construction as of now, so that ensures uninterrupted access to Baltal and Ladakh for both civilian purposes as well as military traffic purposes, thereby boosting regional mobility and also the strategic preparedness or adequate strategic preparedness as well. And apart from that, it would also substantially reduce dependence on the air transport, particularly the movement of the armed forces or the security forces, because currently Indian armed forces, they heavily dependent on or they heavily reliant on Indian Air Force for maintaining the forward position in Ladakh region, right? So for maintaining forward positions in Ladakh region, so as of now they heavily dependent on the Indian Air Force. And in fact, this Jedmore tunnel will enable efficient and also cost-effective road transportation, and it also ensure 24/7 connectivity for the troops and their equipment, their supplies, thereby reducing burden on military aircraft and also extending their operation lifespan as well. Because remember that the line of actual control and line of control and line of actual control are not very far from these tunnels, either Jojila tunnel or Jedmore tunnel. And in fact, so this region is also marked by geopolitical tensions. Particularly, we knew that there is a Pakistan occupied Kashmir through line of control and even line of actual control. So therefore, this Jedmore tunnel further strengthens India's defense posture, and even it has economic significance. It would generate livelihoods as well, because it would boost tourism, right? Because the Jedmore tunnel transforms Sonmarg into a year-round tourist destination by mitigating snowfall related disruptions. For example, if there is a snowfall without a tunnel, so that could certainly block this road. So if we build a tunnel, so that we could bypass the worst impact of avalanches and landslides, right? So we could also ensure all weather connectivity in these areas, and that could further boost tourism, and that would also generate livelihoods for the people as well. Now, next article is rat hole mining is also in news. So we'll try to understand what exactly is this rat hole mining. This is very important, right? So because it is being associated with illegal mining, right? So it is being associated with illegal mining, and it is also being associated with the livelihoods of the people, and it is also being safety of miners, because in Meghalaya, as part of rat hole mining, some miners have lost their life. So therefore, it has concerns with respect to safety of miners and livelihoods of the people and illegal mining. And government apathy is another area. Government apathy. Now, apart from government apathy or departmental apathy, so we could also talk about collusive corruption between the bureaucrats and illegal miners. So that is also another major problem. So these are some aspects which are being associated with the rat hole mining. right? So why it is in use? First and foremost, we'll try to understand why it is in use. So Supreme Court, actually an oral question from the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court has orally asked a question to the union government earlier about this dangers of rat hole mining, right? So Supreme Court has actually asked this question to the union government. So when some miners were trapped in Meghalaya in 2019, right? So this is how rat hole mining takes place. So suddenly the top roof of the this this cave might collapse, or it may flooded in case of excess or torrential rainfall, right? So in Meghalaya, some miners were died, right? So in fact, around 30 miners were trapped inside one of such mine. So some miners were also died. So because of that particular context, the Supreme Court has asked a question to the union government, so that remains unanswered, even as rescue workers recovered bodies of around 4 workers, right? So bodies of 4 workers were being recovered from a flooded rat hole. So rat hole was flooded in Meghalaya in a coal mine in Dima Hasao district of Assam. Okay, so in fact the incident actually took place in East Jaintia Hills. So some incident also took place in Meghalaya as well. So the incident took place in East Jaintia Hills in Meghalaya, occurred 4 years after National Green Tribunal in April 2014 completely banned this rat hole mining, because rat hole mining is very often associated with illegal mining. It is not good for the safety of people who are going for this rat hole mining, and it is also illegal in nature. Because of that reason, National Green Tribunal has already banned this illegal rat hole mining in Meghalaya. In the state of Meghalaya, it was already banned by National Green Tribunal. And in fact, a committee was constituted, a monitoring committee was constituted on this illegal rat hole mining, and a report was already submitted by a monitoring committee that was set up by the National Green Tribunal, right? So this monitoring committee was established by National Green Tribunal under the chairmanship of former Guwahati High Court Judge BP Katakei. And in fact, so this report has recommended to ban illegal rat hole mining because it is hazardous in nature, and it is also very dangerous for the miners who are actually undertaking this rat hole mining. So despite such a ban, the demand for huge quantity of illegally mined coal from the cement manufacturing and thermal power plants in the northeast. So there's a huge demand for this illegally mined coal in cement manufacturing as well as thermal power plants in northeast has sustained this rat hole mining, and these industries have also supported rat hole mining continuously. And in fact, the court had already held that although the private owners of the land, right, so private owners of the land, so they enjoy certain rights with respect to the resources that are being found on their private land, but the mining in the private land should also not go unregulated, and it should not be an unscientific mining, even if the land which has resources belonging to a private person. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also clearly mentioned that the mining policy of any state government should be consistent with, and it is being regulated by the provisions of laws including Mines and Minerals Regulation and Development Act of 1957, and apart from that, the Environment Protection Act of 1986, and also the Mineral Concession Rules of 1960 as well, right? So any state can actually frame their own mining policy, but that mining policy should be consistent and should be aligned with these legislations and rules by the central government with respect to mining. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also very often called this rat hole mining as a primitive method of mining. And in fact, rat hole mining is a method of extracting coal from narrow horizontal seams, and which is prevalent in Meghalaya. Right, so which is very well prevalent in Meghalaya and some parts of Assam as well. Right, so this rat hole mining usually involves that so like how rats mine the ground, the underground, in a similar way people also mine underground for coal. Right, so they go deep inside these holes while mining the coal. Right, so sometimes the roof may collapse, and that would threaten the laborers who are inside this hole. And sometimes it is being flooded, and sometimes low oxygen like conditions, sometimes poisonous gases are being released. So all these problems would result in the death of the laborers inside. So because of that reason, it is being described as a primitive method. It is being very dangerous, and it threatens the life of the laborers or the miners who go inside this rat hole mining. So the term rat hole refers to a very narrow pit which is being dug into the ground, typically just a large enough for one person to descend and extract coal. And once the pits are dug, miners descend using ropes or bamboo ladders to reach coal seams. The coal is then manually extracted using primitive tools such as pickaxes, shovels, and baskets. So this is how the rat hole mining is being described. Right, so that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.